Greetings, everybody. ADHD, what is it? How does it manifest? What are some of the workarounds? We explore that today with this excellent panel of great people that we have here. I'd like to introduce to you the mighty KM, Kristen Melinda, who is a licensed therapist who once worked for the insurance industry and has now returned to her first love of working one on one with everybody. She works with some people, with quite a few people that have ADHD. We have Spanks, who needs no introduction. You know him from the Lifeboat. He is the captain of the Lifeboat. He's also a fire dancer, and he also has ADHD. We have Plant Freak, who incidentally owns Canada. A lot of people don't know that. She's a survivor. Recently started her own YouTube production company, and she's found that she masks her symptoms of ADHD. Please welcome my lovely panel here. Welcome, everybody. Uh, Krista Melinda, I was wondering if you could go ahead and start with a simple definition of what ADHD is and just a brief run through of its subtypes.
Sure. Hey, look, Cosmic Christie's here. Hey, Cosmic Christie, crafty witch. I know these people. So, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, that's the official terminology in the most recent Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. That's our fancy book in the United States of America that we use to diagnose and get things covered by insurance. So, officially, ADHD has two types of symptoms. It has inattentive symptoms and it has hyperactivity symptoms. So, ADHD in general, in a nutshell, involves a pattern of inattention or hyperactivity and impulsivity. And to diagnose it, it has to interfere with a person's functioning or development in some way. So, if somebody has lots of symptoms of hyperactivity, but it causes them no problems, you shouldn't diagnose them with anything. That's kind of the general rule for all diagnoses in the DSM. But the two different main subtypes are going to be inattention and hyperactivity. Now, your inattentive symptoms are going to be things like missing details in schoolwork, having a hard time looking like you're listening when spoken to directly. You kind of like trail off, notice things over in the corner, being forgetful, being easily distracted. There's a whole host of different inattentive symptoms, but if you have up to 5 or more of those symptoms, you qualify for an inattentive subtype. So there's also hyperactive symptoms, which not everybody has. Hyperactive symptoms are going to be more your motor stuff, your movement, your difficulty sitting still, fidgeting, blurting out answers, talking a lot, leaving your seat, basically not being able to stay seated for very long. And there's a host of specific ones there too. But again, if you have 5 or more, you qualify for hyperactive type. Now, if you've got 5 or more in both of those areas, you qualify for what's called ADHD combined type. Whereas if you only qualify in one or the other, you might be considered predominantly hyperactive type or predominantly inattentive type. And that's the nutshell.
So the other two, Plant Freak and Spanks, I was wondering if you guys could simply go through and talk about how you find ADHD manifests in your lives. What difficulties do you find that you have with it?
You go first.
I have a really hard time verbalizing my feelings, especially in the moment. Give me a week later. I need almost a full week to be able to process everything. And if I'm in the moment, I can't verbalize it well, which is horrible. Absolutely horrible. I also find that it manifests a lot in my self-esteem. I never feel like I'm enough. I always feel like I'm beating myself down. Now, this is something I wonder if it's because I was almost forced to mask my symptoms. So my hyperactivity, as much as I want to sit and fidget, I know that as a child, I was told certain things. So I do my very best to find something else other than fidgeting, which then leads to I'm not paying attention because I've got 5 different squirrels up here going crazy with my thoughts. And then I'm like, okay, now, oh, wait, what were you saying? Because you were started 5 minutes ago. I'm lost. And I find I have to be almost like hyper vigilant when it comes to organization. I will forget. I will, I'll forget appointments. I'll forget timings. I have to write everything down immediately. It's underneath my laptop right now, but I have an agenda that literally when I finish something, I write down notes about what happened so I don't lose track or forget exactly what happened in that situation. Because currently in my life, I need to have these very fine-tuned details in place for when I talk to people and do catch-ups on the situation. And I'm not able to do that unless I'm being hyper vigilant about this organization. I also have my attention or my fingers in many different projects at all times. I can't just settle on one. So right now, as much as I'm trying very, very hard to focus on the production plant freak stuff, I'm also got a crochet blanket on the go. I'm working on cut up t-shirts. I have art projects, like visual art projects that I'm working on. I can't just keep one project. It needs to be like 10 projects. So that's how I find it most like or manifest in my life.
To clarify, the question was, how does it manifest in my life?
Yeah, how do you find, or what difficulty, how do you find it manifests? What difficulties do you see? How does it affect you, I suppose, is what I'm asking.
That's a good question. How does it not manifest in my life? And also, there are a lot of, I feel like, things that I deal with that may or may not come from other experiences that I've had. Whether it be like a wall that I've put up or a process that I've put in place in my brain to like deal with certain situations. So it's hard for me to sift through and decide what's from ADHD, what's from this, what's from that. But I mean, I'm very fidgety. I have a lot of that hyperactive stuff going on, but I'm not without the inattentive details of it. I'm always in sensory overload, especially when I'm having a conversation with someone. That's like my least favorite thing in the whole world, is like how hard I have to try to have a conversation with somebody, because like my brain is just all over the place. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with the amount of caffeine that, and we can get into that later too, because that's one of the ways I deal with ADHD. But it's like a double-edged sword, because it helps with focus, but not when certain XYZ is happening. It's very strange, but I think that it's hard for me to answer that question more than that. I think my whole life is struggling with this, and all of my successes are based upon how well I deal with it.
Do you find it interfere? I mean, the main reason why I brought up fire walking, first of all, it's very interesting.
Fire dancing or fire walking?
Fire dancing, I suppose. But yeah, your fire dancing, I find that would probably take an extreme amount of focus to know where you are and things like that. Do you find that you have struggles with that, or are you pretty good at having everything worked out?
Talk about focus now?
Sure, yeah.
Before I forget, an interesting thing about the fire dancing and focus, when I first got into it, the coolest thing happened the first time I did it, and everything else disappeared, and it was just me and the fire. And that continues to this day. In fact, my new challenge and hurdle with the fire dancing is to interact with the audience and make eye contact with the audience and share it with the audience, rather than just dancing with myself while people watch.
Sure.
So I think that it is quite overwhelming, and that's why I like it, probably, if we were to generalize it as much as possible.
Kristen Melinda, do you happen to have any thoughts about what you find as far as breakage of how many people are inattentive versus how many people you find just generally display the hyperactivity segments of that? Do you have any guesses as far as how common each is?
Well, it's a little different now, like in my day-to-day world. Like I work mainly with older teenagers and adults now. So by that point, people kind of tend to figure out ways to get the fidgets under control. Like they have fidget toys, they have, you'll bounce a leg, and I see some degree of all of that, but people figure out ways to cope with that as they get through life. They may still struggle with the inattentive part, but
Sure.
at this point, I see less obvious symptoms of hyperactivity in older people. That said, I used to work with kids as young as 4, And girls, boys, it didn't matter. Like, if they had a previous diagnosis of ADHD, they were bouncing off the walls in my office. I was never going to try to make them sit still. But to some degree, that's also children. It's a little bit more so in kids I saw that were diagnosed with ADHD. So with them, we would focus more on things like how to calm your body, how to self-soothe, stuff like that. But as far as like a split in like how frequent they are, um, I haven't seen any particularly specific pattern there. There's probably statistics on there as far as what's diagnosed, but then that's going to be affected by what symptoms people are displaying. Because if you don't get diagnosed until you're in your 30s or 40s, then you might have learned some ways to manage the hyperactivity, so it's not going to be as obvious and easy to diagnose.
Sure. Yeah, and I
But I really wanted to say, I really liked hearing what Spank said about the fire flow you got into. What you described now just sounded to me like one of my favorite ADHD superpowers, which is this ability when you get really into something that's really your thing. People with ADHD can do this beautiful hyper focus thing where most of the time, like, it's all the things and I can't focus on this one thing. But if it's a really compelling thing, people with ADHD can hyper focus and really get into it like nobody I've ever seen. And it's actually kind of beautiful. So I don't think of it, and Spanks has talked about this before on many lives before, that I think that mainly it becomes a disorder only because of the context in which we're putting people. Like, not everybody belongs behind a desk for 8 to 10 hours a day. They just don't.
Yeah, and I find that, at least in my life, that I'm having to diagram things as much as possible to try to visualize things. And of course, I have problems changing tasks. I'm more of the inattentive style. And I also find that I have to choose some, it's like I have extra brain cycles going on a little bit. I have to do something simple to kind of chew up a few of the extra cycles to focus. It's like something small just to kind of help expend a little bit of excess brain power. And I know it doesn't work like that, but that's the best how I can explain it. Certainly in the chat, if you have any questions, please ask, and we'll try to get around to those. Does anybody have any special things that they do to get around ADHD? Or, I mean, as far as things that they find that might work for them?
For the inattentive part,
Yeah.
it helps me focus to have some sort of background noise or to have music playing or something that ambiently is exciting to me. Like, I think that's why the music is good on top of being sensory stimulus. I think that the fact that something awesome, something that I love is happening helps me focus on stuff, especially when it's something that I'm not interested in at all, but needs to be done. I find that having something going on like that helps a lot. And for the hyperactivity, I just need to either run my gas all the way out or really powerfully quiet my mind in some way, whether that be meditation or exhaustion is definitely the go-to. It's a lot easier, which is not healthy.
Sure. Platform.
I'd say that I agree with the exhaustion part. I don't know that I have figured out anything that is a healthy manner. I am either mentally exhausted or physically exhausted all of the time lately. So that's the only way that I'm able to completely shut off at the end of the night. I find meditations, because I find 12 o'clock rolls around, I'm wide awake.
Yeah.
I don't know why. But I'm wide awake at 12 o'clock. I'm tired at 11. I go lay down, take my time to fall asleep. 12 o'clock, I'm wide awake again. And it's 2, 3 o'clock in the morning by the time I'm actually falling asleep. So I find meditation helps with that, as long as the meditation isn't fully interesting. If I'm interested in like the description of what it is that they're giving, then I'm fully visualizing and I'm waiting for the next word. But if I've done it like 4 or 5 times, I'm like, oh, I'm used to this. It's okay. Then that helps. Or I've been running and hiking and the physical exhaustion. Every single day, I need to do something for at least 2 hours. And then I know by the end of the night, I'm okay.
Yeah, and I've recently used one of Spanks' suggestions that I heard him mention. I think it was a couple days ago. He talked about a little bit on the lifeboat, and he mentioned the physical exhaust that he finds getting exhausted helps him. And I found the same thing. Surprise! I've never thought about that, but it really did help me after I was doing a survey in the middle of the day when it was extremely hot, hiking with I don't know, probably a 50-pound piece of gear for a ways, that it really, I mean, first of all, just carrying that with me, it helped me to keep my mind at the task at hand. But then afterwards, it's like, wow, I just sat down and noticed, like, wow, I can focus a lot better. It's like you have much more peace, going on in your mind. You don't have all these constant little voices going on. Let's see here. Cosmic Christie writes, I'm currently hyperactive mode, which mixed in with inattention means I'm going 100 miles an hour in brain and body. And my autism is annoyed at the messiness of it all. Yes, and that is one thing that I found is, and I've seen it mentioned in a couple studies and quite a few YouTube videos that those people with hyperactivity or ADHD, they tend they tend to expect failure, but once failure hits, they seem to do really well with chaos as far as patching things together quickly. And I just, wow, that one took me by surprise. But I find I kind of operate in the same mode. I know at least in my life, I'll sit and don't screw up, don't screw up, don't screw up. And because you're focused on that, because you're chewing up so many brain cycles on it, you kind of will mess up, and then you recover from that point forward. Um,
I've
supposedly,
seen
sorry.
I've seen people kind of, whether purposefully or not purposefully, kind of almost use that as a coping mechanism.
Mm,
And part of the theory behind that is if something is either put off till the last minute or it's gotten to the point of utter chaos, you have this adrenaline aiding in your focus, but it's your body's own natural stimulant, basically. And so that becomes kind of an unintentional coping mechanism for like, and I've seen that in people I work with, and then also in like friends and family and stuff like that too. So it kind of becomes like, okay, well, sometimes that works fine, but is there a way to not always have to rely on that adrenaline rush to focus on
yeah.
something?
I
Is there a
think
way
that
to
is the
otherwise?
key question for sure.
Yeah.
Because we can all band-aid it, right? And like, all right, well, if I'm exhausted, I can sleep. And, if it's an emergency, I'll get it done. So I'll just
Mhm.
push it off until it's about to blow up. But I mean, none of that's healthy, right? So if we can find a way to like just make it happen or kind of aid it along, that's really the eternal struggle for sure.
Mm.
Yeah.
Buster Crochet, oftentimes those with ADHD or ADD, when they find something they'll love, they will hydro focus on it. Everything else disappears. Yeah, I find that to be true in my case. That I 100% agree with that. Going on in my life, that's for darn sure. I noticed that, and I saw this mentioned that a possible way to help yourself deal with ADHD is to try to develop habits as much as possible because supposedly the hydroganglia, I'm probably not even saying that right. I imagine I just made Kristen Melinda cringe.
Hydrogangula.
It's the part of your brain that deals with habits,
Okay.
that it still works really well for people with ADHD. Apparently, it's not affected. And one of the suggestions I've heard was to try to do as many things that are habit, try to develop as many habits as possible. Leave your keys, in the same place, things like that, and try to develop, um, know that you're going to you can accept that you're going to fail, but just try to hold it off as long as possible. Just try to,
Mhm.
there was an example I heard of somebody talking about using online gamers with this, and they found the person doing the study found that the people in the gaming that they would games that they should win, they just kept falling apart because oh, we're going to fail, we're going to fail, we're going to fail. So he started working with them. Said, okay, if you fail, fine. We're not saying don't fail, but just try to make the other team. This is on online game. Try to make the other team pay for it as much as possible. Don't just good game and give up. Try to make them fail or try to make them hurt for that victory as much as possible. And they found that when they were studying this group that they started doing that, and their game started going longer and longer, and that they actually started winning quite a few matches. It's because they had developed a habit. And that's something I'd definitely be interested in exploring. I find it, at least in my case, I have to use habits. Otherwise I'll leave my keys in the sink, or throw away, instead of throwing the plate in the sink and throwing the extra food in the trash, I'll vice versa, throw the excess eggs into the sink and throw the plate in the garbage can. Let's see here. Do we have any
Routine
questions?
is one of the, like, adding a routine and creating structure to your day is going to be one of the main, like, interventions or recommendations that probably a therapist who's not trying to prescribe medication is going to make, is that
Oh,
um, because it's more difficult to stay on one path without getting sidetracked by other things. Adding structure to your day is one of those main coping skills that we recommend a lot. Of course, there's also the problem there with it. Kind of, there's a concern of like, well, my day's going to be boring and I would like to have some surprises. Usually the way around that is like, okay, put this hour in your day that's unscheduled, that you can just do whatever you want. And then you kind of have like the space and the structure for the things that you need to get done, but you still have, but I know that my day isn't completely scheduled. I know that I still have the chance for some surprises.
mhm.
Mhm.
Nice.
Mhm.
Cosmic Christie writes, I did melt down during training for my kid who is autistic ADHD also. There's a lot of neuroscience behind what's happening in the brains of kids and ADHD.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm, I must admit, I didn't expect to run into the wealth of information or the breadth of information I found online studying this. I know that it wasn't that long ago. There didn't seem to be a whole lot really out there. At least, maybe I'm just having better luck now, but it seems like this is much more mainstream than it was like in the 90s and double O's, where it was just kids have ADHD. It seemed like, I won't say it was, it seemed like to many that it was almost just a thing of, oh, kids have ADHD, we'll give them Ritalin. It seems like it's affecting a lot more people than that. And that's probably well, yeah, that's a misconception, almost certainly. And I suppose that's how society first recognized it. Do you have any thoughts about that, Kristen Melinda?
So I spent about 6 months working for a psychologist
Mhm.
who, like, I was an assessment technician. So I administered the psych tests, I scored them, I interpreted them, and I wrote up a report. He had the final say over it, and he would edit it and, make his own interpretation. But I did that stuff. And his primary work was in confirming ADHD diagnoses and ruling them out. Because one way you can diagnose is you can go down a symptom checklist and say, I have that, I have that, I have that. But a more, what's arguably more objective way of looking at it is to do more additional testing and look at, like, there's computerized tasks that like will actively like test like how long can you like look for this blinking dot, stuff like that, and different scores that would indicate different levels of attention or inattention. I would say I had some experiences there that make me personally feel like it is a little bit overdiagnosed, particularly in
Mhm.
small children.
Mhm.
Small children are not built to sit still. They are not. Children in general, I don't think are built to sit still. Honestly, I don't think adults are built to sit still. That's relatively recent in our evolution that we're trying to make everybody sit behind a desk so much. That's relatively recent. So it is a little bit overdiagnosed because, of course, if you put a kid into an environment, well, they have to be in a relatively confined area all day. They're going to struggle with being able to do that, like just developmentally. And sometimes, well-meaning parents, do rush to, well, I want my kid to succeed. I don't want them to be miserable at school. Like they will rush for that diagnosis. And unfortunately, some of the time, like ideally how it would work is you would get that diagnosis first, and then you might consider prescribing medication or doing some kind of intervention. But unfortunately, what we saw a lot was people would go to the primary care doctor first, who primary care doctors are fantastic. I love them. I have no beef with primary care doctors. But they would prescribe a medication first. They would prescribe Ritalin or a stimulant or something like that first. And then send the kid to testing for confirmation. And at that point, it's almost like some of the feedback I got on my reports was, why didn't you put an ADHD diagnosis? They're on stimulants and it helps them. And I was offended by that because that's not how diagnosis is supposed to work. To some degree, stimulants will improve focus in a lot of people, whether they have ADHD or not. So I do believe it is a little bit overdiagnosed. I'll say that.
We're joined by Don Gloves, who's an RN who has over 15 years in the medical industry and was worked in the legal system before that, and has been diagnosed, and not only diagnosed, but happens to work with people with ADHD. Don, welcome to the panel.
Hello, everybody. And pardon me, I'm like a mess.
Life happens.
I'm literally like I'm the embodiment right now of ADHD.
Of course, Don Gloves is part of the Lifeboat community, as is everybody here. So there are no strangers in this panel. Don, I was just wondering really quick if you could just go through, if you wouldn't mind, if you just go through and describe how you find that ADHD affects you, or how you've been dealing with it and that kind of thing.
Well, I wasn't diagnosed until I was 51 years old. And I had actually forgotten and taken my medication that morning. And so I still tested positive, I like to say. But when I got tested, I was in the middle of kind of recovering from a traumatic family event. And I think that probably made it worse. And then 2 months later, there was a horrific family event, and that just... So when I was a child, I was not necessarily hyperactive. It was mostly inattentive, definitely. I would finish my work quietly in class and then stare out of the window for the rest of the time, and had made up elaborate stories. I had elaborate stories going on in my head, and they had episodes. I would, like, if we went to lunch, I'd come back and I'd pick up right where I left off. And but I always got decent grades. I wasn't, top of the class or anything. But I always did well, even with math. And it's the same carried through in high school. And I wish I had known then that I had it, because when the first attempt to go to university, I was blindsided because the strange and, study habits that I had in high school were not going to work in college. And instead of saying, is something wrong? Should I get some help for this? I just dropped out and said, I'm stupid. I can't do this. So Yeah, that's one thing where it has played a tremendous role in my self-esteem, especially as a child. And yeah, so getting diagnosed as an adult was great. I think my psychiatrist was like, why do you want to be diagnosed with that? I said, I just want to know why my brain works the way it does, so I know how to go forward. And I didn't look at it as a disability or anything like that. It's just my brain works different, and too many tabs are open. But somehow I make it work. I did an LVN program and an RN program with undiagnosed ADHD.
Wow.
There were problems along the way, but I managed to do it. So I would say it's had effects. I've gotten in trouble at work, especially at the courthouse. They don't like it when they hear the clerks all in the back laughing. So I was a little bit of a cut up there. And but I mean, I always would get my work done. So
Wow.
yeah. And what I'm finding though is that I have a complex PTSD, and I find that the grief and acute trauma that I have experienced since 2020 really has made it worse. I notice that's actually one of the reasons why I asked my doctor to have me tested, was because I noticed something seemed to be changing. I couldn't sit down and read a book anymore. I loved reading books. I couldn't pay attention to a TV show. I had always kind of struggled, but usually if I put captions on, I could keep up. And I was having to rewind stuff and rewatch because I'm like, wait, what just happened? Why are they there? And things like that. And I'm still having trouble with those things. And I'm using audiobooks. I use Audible and things like that to kind of try to make things easier, because I don't want to give up things that I love. I love watching movies and I love books. And yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm at 54 now, and it's been a matter of learning to adapt to it, especially since it seems to have changed.
Wow.
Well, it sounds like you developed some really effective coping mechanisms that worked well for you in school, but then you had life stressors that just it stretched them to the limit, and that makes
Right.
sense. What worked before didn't work when you're overtaxed.
Exactly. Yeah. I remember there was this, I was taking anatomy and physiology, and so at that time I was a psychology major. I had walked into the lab practicum where they have just bones lying all over and you have to identify them. And I walked in and I'm like, that's that long bone in the leg. I could not remember anything. And it's because I had tried to do what I did in high school, which is stay up the night before the test and then, go in and get an A. And I could not do that with a college level anatomy and physiology practicum test. And that was kind of the beginning of the end for me in my first round of college. So that's just an example. My brother has it too. He was diagnosed because he's a boy.
I think that reminds me, you said something about the 90s, Ben, and I think that all those kids that got Ritalin in the 90s were where the data came from. I was one of those kids, and I think that, I don't know. There's a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Don Gloves. I have a lot to think about now.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, and one of the reasons why girls are diagnosed with other things like anxiety and depression and not ADHD is because for the longest time, they were only looking for it in white, male children. They didn't believe that girls got
Mm,
ADHD.
mm,
And because we weren't all hyperactive, and that's because it presents differently in women
mm.
and girls. So I started learning about those things when I became guardian to my best friend's daughter 2 years ago. She was diagnosed with ADHD, and I was trying to understand it better. And as I'm looking at videos and literature, I'm like, wait a minute, that's me.
Mm.
And realizing that I've had it all along.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's been a journey.
Mm. Wow. Thank you for that. That's powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that at least in my case, I probably, I mean, I can think back to things that I did in not even high school, before that, middle school.
Mhm.
I can think back to issues that I had and nobody caught it, but back
Mhm.
then, I don't think anybody was really looking. I mean, I would take, simple math tests, and I don't know, it's just one of these things where it's like 100 questions on a sheet. I would
Mhm.
draw little boxes around these and solve them, and then I'd draw little characters around these and then solve them,
Mhm.
and start doing all this, and all sorts of things like that. And they decided to stick me in a special math class, and then
Mhm.
just work on multiplication, not ever hit division. As a result,
Oh.
I'm still weak in division, which is
Oh wow.
odd because there's a lot of math in what I do.
Mhm.
But I was told there'd be no math.
You were also told, as I was, that you wouldn't have a calculator with you all the time.
Yeah,
Which we
Lies.
That
do.
All
was a
lies.
lie.
Which we do.
yeah,
Yep.
I'm
Lie
so
detector
thankful.
determined that was a lie.
Yep.
I am also very thankful I've never needed to cross multiply fractions, at least not in my line of work.
Uh,
So
That's
thankful.
like the way that makes the most sense to my brain.
Yeah.
The
we
cross
have to do
multiply.
it
Yeah.
to do dosage calculations because there's so many factors. So sometimes I'll wind up with
Shannon Smith said
like
God invented
3 or 4,
calculus.
6 different fractions.
Yeah.
Yep. So I had to get with the fractions, multiplying the fractions. It was not a good time.
See, my
I mean,
reason's not as good as yours. It's just because I like to bake and for
There you
large
go.
amounts of people.
That's important. Baked goods are vital.
it might be
I
a
noticed that.
workaround, but I've never had to cross multiply fraction in music ever. It's just
Well, yeah.
looking at it like, okay, yeah, okay, I see you still have a quarter note left in this, or depending upon whatever
Mhm.
time. Yeah, I've been pretty blessed with getting by with it. I'm so thankful there's decimals. It's a
Yeah.
workaround. Let's see here. We have Jason P writes, yes, KM, I can multitask like a boss when under pressure,
Mm.
but with mundane things, I struggle a bit.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's see here. Rebecca writes, as for hyperfocus, I can do that when sewing or reading a good book.
Mhm.
Yes, yes. And I found that true, and I did not realize it, but that's what I was doing when I was playing drums. And then, at least in my case, it seemed like you're doing something physical, something that's fairly rote. I mean,
Mhm.
at least for me with drums, I find that it's muscle memory of trying to develop the speed and the timing to hit, exactly. So you're constantly doing that. Doesn't require a lot of brain processing power. I mean, you still have a
Mhm.
little few cycles left. So yeah, that when I would play, I'd find that I could do
It's a
fairly
different part of
good.
your brain.
I read more when I have TV in the background. I have to have that
Yeah.
noise going. Spanks Calhoun hit that earlier, talking about having to have music
Mhm.
going on to help drown out some of the the excess cycles. And
Yeah, Anderson Cooper
mm,
and CNN 360 got me through the LVN program. Because they replayed it. It's 2 hours long and they play it 3 times for each time zone. So that gave me a good 6-hour block.
Do you guys want to hear something interesting about me?
Yeah.
I can't read if there's other stuff going on. I can maybe listen to music, but if it's too grabby, if it grabs my attention too much, I can't read. I can't read anything. I will like sit there and observe nothing, which I think is odd. That's not usually how it works.
Actually, now that you mention that, it's not that weird, I don't think, because I'm reading, I'm looking at words, but I'm not retaining a darn thing.
Yep.
Yeah. Go back and read the page like 4 times.
Reading's different. It's weird for me, at least for us.
Yeah, that's one thing I've noticed for me recently too. My ADHD used to be controllable through just diet. I mean, I always had it. It was always cracking through, but now with some health problems, health issues that I'm having, I'm finding that the little bit of fatigue and some other issues are kicking my ADHD in a high gear. And yeah, I cannot read reference material to save my life. I have to read it and reread it. And Shannon Smith's, listening to my favorite audiobook over and over again.
Dude, the next time you are reading reference material, put some Rush on. Serious.
I'll have to give that one a whirl.
I bet you money it works.
That speaks to tailoring your environment to what works for you, though, because like the common ADHD thing is difficulty focusing, right? But what helps different people focus is different. Like I've known people that they needed background noise or they couldn't focus on a thing. And then I've known people like Spanks who like, I have to have like quiet to be able to focus on this. Which is why, you know, I like the idea of being able to kind of control your own work environment as much as possible, because what helps you focus is going to be different from what helps someone else focus.
Yeah.
For me, I think it really just depends on my mood and how my ADHD has been for that day. If I am a bit more hyperactive, I can't have music or something going. If I'm a little bit more intent, like not able to pay attention to everything around me, then the music kind of helps draw me in if I've got music going. It really depends on the day, but it kind of made me think also, Dawn, I'm looking into CPTSD for myself. And it's interesting how you had said that everything kind of changed for you around that time. And that's when this started kicking in, where it really depended on where I was for the day. If I was a little bit lower, then I needed to have music going. If I was a little bit higher and I had too many voices going on in my head, then it needed to be quiet.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was interesting. And I appreciate that explanation from your own experience with that. Thank you.
Cosmic Christie writes, I have whiteboards all over the place, carry a little notepad and pen around the moment because my tent cannot fit any more amenities. I write everything down. I find that I'm having to do that now as well.
I use a planner. It's a disc planner.
Did you say
carrying things disc, yeah. It's this particular brand is called Happy Planner. Staples has one too, but they call it a disc planner because this is how it's bound. I can take pages out, I can add pages, I can move pages around, and that works for me.
Wow.
That brings me back to using binders in school.
Yeah. And I think with when your dad was started talking recently about journaling and everything, I was trying to find a way to incorporate that because my memory is bad. Just before this, I had my therapy session and it's virtual. And I was trying to go back and tell my therapist how the weekend was. I could not remember Saturday. Well, and she says, well, there was that one thing. I'm like, oh yeah.
That's why.
And it was all downhill from there. Didn't want to remember Saturday, I guess. So, but I have a hard time remembering when something happened. Frequently, I'll be talking to the kiddo and I'll say, when was that? Monday, Tuesday? She'll be like, it was yesterday. I'm like, oh, okay. I do that frequently. And so I found that carrying that around, it's just too big is what I don't like, but carrying that around and jotting stuff down as I'm going makes it easier for me to keep a handle on and remember things.
I've heard a lot of people tell me that they experience something that they call time blindness, or like it's hard for them to be aware of time, like they lose track of it easily, or they don't realize, that so much time has passed, or things like that. Do you guys experience that? I know it's
I
different
just
for different
did.
people. Yeah.
I have enough time to tone and color my hair. I did not have enough time.
And for me, I have to have timers for everything, or else it's 2-3 hours later I remember.
Yeah. A couple of weeks ago, I was 2 days late for my physical therapy evaluation. 2 days.
Wow.
Did you show up on the 2 days after it was?
Yeah.
Did you show up there same time, just 2 days later?
Yeah, I did. And because I could have sworn I had asked for time off and everything, saying I'm going to have to be late on Thursday because I have my my physical therapy appointment. And I get there and she's like, yeah, you were supposed to be here on Tuesday. And I'm like, okay. We'll try.
I call those damn T days. I get Tuesday and Thursday confused all the time. They're damn T days in my world. Just, yeah.
Rebecca asks, do people's partners need to do anything extra or specific to help any of you?
I'm sure that's going to be specific person to person.
Yeah.
It's probably not that different from... Sorry. I was going to say not that different from any relationship, how you would meet your partner halfway on things. You know what I mean? Understanding who your partner is and how they deal with things, how they move through adversity, I think is very important for having a successful relationship. Sorry if I'm quiet. I'll work on that. We're going to do better.
You're good.
Let's see here. Shannon Smith comments, no, it's cruel to make especially kids sit still, and many schools took away recess. Yeah, that's true. Kristen Melinda was talking about that earlier, that kids are really designed to sit still.
No one really is. This whole chairs thing is, man came up with that.
Yeah.
There are so many more, at least there's getting to be more accommodations for ways that kids in school and can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there are getting to be more accommodations for kids who need to wiggle, need to get their physical energy out. Like you have special chairs that wobble back and forth. You have exercise bands you can wrap around the legs of the chair that they can push their feet against. But this is all kind of relatively recent. I feel like in the 90s, it wasn't really the behavioral stuff wasn't utilized as much. Yeah.
Kids got lost in the shuffle with both ADHD and autism spectrum.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
In Canada, I was just pushed through the education system all through elementary and the little bit of high school that I did do. I didn't actually graduate. There's no possible way I could do that. I was emancipated from the government at 16.
Wow.
As soon as I was living on my own, there was no going to school. I wanted to pay it. It was boring. I didn't want to pay attention to it. So when I did manage to go and get a post-secondary education, I applied as a mature student. I was 30 years old when I finally went back to school.
Wow.
Amazing.
Man.
That's great. My brother did.
And it had to be fast-tracked or I couldn't pay attention. So it was a 3-year program done in 18 months.
Wow.
I wouldn't have graduated without special help. I got special help every school that I went to, and I went to a lot of schools. We moved a lot. but for some reason, I received an inordinate amount of assistance from teachers and counselors and et cetera, up until the very end.
That's
Well, you're a
great.
smart person, and I'm sure you were a smart kid, and they realized that, and they wanted you to succeed.
This computer science teacher, and I'll never forget him telling me about my wasted potential.
Oh gosh.
Yeah,
I do know that.
wish him the best.
I do know that a lot of kids who grew up with ADHD, they almost tend to think that they're stupid because other kids are progressing much faster, and it's like, why am I not getting this? I know that was
Yeah.
true in my case. It's just like, why is this not happening? And at least I would like to think that's better now. And I guess I would go to the question, body illusion. Um, do you think ADHD is more prevalent, or is our lifestyle changing to make it more so?
I think the way that we view the world and view society is changing.
Hmm.
ADHD may or may not have always been present for all we know, but
Um,
our understanding of the human brain is elementary at best.
Right. And
oh yeah.
I think that as it's studied, and we get more information about it, that and as we improve things, we're starting to realize, like, oh wait, girls get it too. We need to start testing them as well and evaluating them, and then coming up with methods to help a child get their work done.
I think, like, as a concept, asking a child to do something and then they don't do it, and then like reaffirming, and like when you run into the same thing over and over and you're trying the same thing over and over, isn't that the definition of insanity? I think if
Yeah.
we got rid of, or not got rid of, but if we ignored these diagnoses just hypothetically for a second and just like employed, maybe try a different method when we run into something like that, or I don't know, I feel like this is not an insurmountable societal problem. It's just a societal problem that people don't want to friggin' deal with. It would be a lot easier if everyone in my class, if I'm a teacher, just fell in line, and that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe I'm just irritated about my childhood, but I think that if we treat these issues a little differently, it'll be a lot easier.
Yeah, I think more awareness too. We've really. My mom passed away 30 years ago. She had mental health disorders, and they are very different diagnoses nowadays than they would have been the 35 years ago when she was diagnosed. So I think the awareness, and even though it is elementary at best, the understanding that we have of the human brain, we are at least, some of us at least, are trying to get a better understanding and try and give it all that understanding to society. 100%. I think that that's part of it, is that we're just becoming more aware.
Yeah.
I suppose this question might be more for Kristen Melinda, given her field of study. Anyone here know what type of tests are performed to identify ADD or ADHD, etc.?
Sure. It depends on who you go see first.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you go see a psychiatrist or an MD who prescribes medication first, they're likely to give you a questionnaire. They're going to ask you about symptoms. They're going to, do you have a hard time sitting still? They're going to go down the checklist, or they're going to go down the checklist with a parent. If you go to a psychologist, they're more likely to give you like standardized instruments. The most popular one that I know of that I had the most experience with was called the Connors Performance Test. It's basically a computerized test where you've got, Dawn knows. She suffered through it.
It was so
You've
boring.
got the little thing that lights up, and you have to click it, and you have to keep looking at the screen to click it when it shows up. And if you get distracted, you're going to miss it. So you get a score for how many misses there are. And of course, then that's combined with other measures. And you're also going to rule out other things too.
Right.
Mm.
The test also tells you, like, are you clicking too early, anticipating the
Mhm.
light, and
Why is that a
clicking too
problem?
late?
Impulsivity. It's a measure of
Yeah.
impulsivity. It might not be a problem, but that's what it's supposed to measure.
Maybe I'm an X-Man and I can just tell the future, though. You know.
I thought I
You
was a
might be.
precog.
You might be.
No, it's probably just impulsivity. You're right. You're right.
Well, I'll put it this way. That's what it's supposed to measure, right? Like, no testing instrument like that is perfect. That's why you're not supposed to only use one. That's why you're supposed to use a variety of things to confirm.
Mm.
Yeah. But like, I have Kaiser here in Southern California, and when I actually had the kiddo retested for reasons, and she was given the exact same test. What did you say it was called?
The Connors performance test.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Try to catch the X.
Yeah.
When I did it, I went over the questionnaire with my psychiatrist, and after he asked me the questions, he's kind of like, oh, because I think he thought, oh, here she comes, self-diagnosing. And I'm like, I don't really do that. He goes through the questionnaire and he realizes, oh, there might be something going on here. So he referred me to the psychologist. And she was the one that administered the test. And I'm in a room. We're both at a desk. I'm on the side with the computer, and she is using her main computer doing something. And I can tell you exactly what was in the room. It was just 2 chairs, the 2 desks, her computer, and a printer up on top of a bookshelf. And at one point, she said, I'm going to step out to print something real quick. And I'm like, you have a printer right there. You can't print there. She's like, I know. And I mean, I kept trying to engage her while I'm taking the test.
Mm.
She has beautiful tattoos on her right arm. And I was like, I love your tattoos, by the way. And she said, before she'd even finished printing out the report, she said, I already know you have ADHD. Without even looking at the report. But let's go ahead and take a look at this. So, the good thing about that test is that you do get the results immediately.
Mm.
I didn't read it though. It's too long.
What you said about the psychiatrist being a little bit skeptical at first and self-diagnosis, like, it reminds me, I don't know where in the chat it was, but Misha came in and said something like, not as qualified as this panel. I would argue that you are just as qualified as the panel. You are the expert on your own experience always.
Mm.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know what symptoms you're experiencing, you know what is difficult for you and what is not. I really chafe at professionals trying to coming across like they know more about you than you do. And I maybe that's not what your psychiatrist meant by that, but I have met people for whom that was their experience, and that's one of my pet peeves.
I could hear it in his voice.
Mm.
And he's usually not like that with me. He knows I'm a registered nurse, and usually we do just fine. But when I brought that up, it was kind of like, oh, here we go. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, okay.
Mm.
I'm curious, Kristen. Is it common for there to be, like, and because Dawn had brought this up earlier, misdiagnosis of like depression, anxiety for ADHD, but specifically in women because there was such little study for a long time? Or Dawn, either one of you.
I mean, the diagnosis can get complicated because depression makes it difficult to focus for a lot of people. If you have no energy, if you're feeling hopeless about life, why are you going to want to focus on schoolwork, right? So sometimes depression can look like inattentive ADHD and vice versa. So sometimes they can get mistaken for one another. But to make it even more complicated, they can also coexist, of course. So it really
One,
needs someone
sorry, go ahead.
patient to sit down with you and really like suss out like, well, what's going on with you specifically. Like, does this also come with, you know, feelings of sadness, tearfulness? Does it, or is it just the focus, you know? Sorry, Dawn.
Yeah, I was just going to say that depression and anxiety can actually be comorbidities to ADHD, as well as sometimes they're triggered by the ADHD because we're rolling through life. Nobody knows what's going on with us, but we know something's not right. We are down on ourselves. We have negative self-talk. We might even hear somebody else, a teacher said somebody, one of our high school teachers told my grandmother that my brother wasn't, he didn't have a learning disability. He's just lazy.
Oh, I hate that. I hate that.
Yeah. Good times. I will remember that for the rest of my life. And I think he's dead now. He was a history teacher. But yeah, not a very understanding guy.
Rebecca writes, going back to Kristen Melinda talking about children, my mom wouldn't let me fidget in any way at the cult meetings, and spankings were extremely common. Maybe one of the reasons I wasn't diagnosed until I was 52. Wow.
I'm so sorry, Rebecca.
Because you just think you're bad.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the... Not sure if it's been mentioned. Also, females have not been so really tested for neurodivergence until the last decade or so. The lost girls, as we refer to often.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think part of that is kind of like what Spanks mentioned with the classroom phenomenon. Like if you're one teacher and you've got a classroom of 30 kids, what are you going to notice first? The kid who's just kind of staring off into space, or a kid who's like swinging from the rafters, you know?
Right. Yeah. At least she's quiet. That one, you know. Yeah.
Although personally, I love the kids swinging from the rafters. I have a soft spot for them because my kid is one of them.
Shannon Smith, I suppose this is probably more for Kristen Melinda because I couldn't speak to this. I was able to be attentive as a child and young adult, but not now. Can you develop it later?
Actually, technically part of the diagnostic criteria is the symptoms have to have been around in childhood. That like to actually have a diagnosis, there has to have been some evidence that you had these symptoms before you became an adult. However, that's not to say that they don't become more apparent, or some of the coping mechanisms you had that worked really well for you at one time, like what Dawn was talking about, maybe don't work later on in a higher stress environment or just an altogether different kind of environment. So something could have been masked and then become unmasked. I've seen that happen.
Also,
there's
with
a lot of masking. Sorry. Go ahead, Spanks.
It's all right. I'm also sorry. We both have great ideas at the same time. Now I forgot. Gosh darn it.
Shoot.
It's my fault. I shouldn't have said so many things instead of...
That's a symptom, you guys.
Oh, that happens to me. I hate that.
Well, that's not meant to reduce it, but that's something I hear a lot, is that I have to say the thing right when I think about it or I'm going to lose it. I'm going to forget it. I hear that a lot.
I can get it back. I swear I can.
Yeah.
I wonder if you have ADHD or you get pushed in by teachers that don't recognize you're done with the info and bored. And they are feeding the info too slow. Rick Spicer.
So I have somebody in my life who I literally ask them, do I need to say that faster or slower for you?
Oh, nice.
Because I can tell that when he's listening to it, he's processing. But I don't know at what speed he's processing because I don't know where that topic is in his head. So I go, do I need to say that faster or slower for you? Typically, it's you need to say it faster. I already talk very fast. So now I've got to sound like a mouse. But it's okay. I'm going to try and say it faster. But then I've recognized that within myself, by doing that to assist them, I'm starting to say it to other people because I'm recognizing it helps me. I have to tell people. People can't tell me things slower. You have to tell me faster. I'm processing at a faster pace.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Jacob and
you're
I
trailing off
disconnect like that.
Sorry?
Jacob and
Oh.
I disconnect like that. That's what I said.
Oh.
Sorry.
Fourth grade. This is where it was most apparent to me that something was different. I didn't know what it was called or if it was actually a thing. It was just me being weird. But with this daydreaming and staring out the window after I finished my work, I had a very intuitive teacher. I loved Mr. Wright. He was amazing. So he notices he's got two kids with similar problems. They're presenting differently. He might not have even known it was ADHD. This is the early 80s. So, oh no, we'll call it early 80s, fourth grade. And so we've got Jeff over here who speeds through his work. And then he's playing with toys under his desk. And then there's me who speeds through her work. And then she's staring out the window. Both of us are, I'm quiet. He's relatively quiet. He's playing, it was usually Rubik's Cube. And he would be doing the Rubik's Cube under the desk. And he could solve it. And the teacher noticed that both of us were kind of in the same place in a way. And so what he would do, I remember we were diagramming sentences. Did anybody else have to do that in high school?
Vaguely remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Vaguely.
So Jeff and I would start to race to see who could diagram the sentences faster. And we were kind of pretty even. So what the teacher decided to do, Mr. Wright, he brought us up to the desk and said, hey, since you guys are really good at this, why don't you go around and see if any of your friends need help? And so, right there, he had two teachers' aides, was able to give them something that they enjoyed doing to keep busy. And, but that was the only teacher I had like that.
Mm-hmm.
Plant Freak or Spanks, do either of you remember any particular childhood experiences like that?
I used to race when I was learning cursive. Me and Greg would race to see who could finish our cursive fastest, and it did not help our penmanship, but it was fun.
You got it done, but what does it say?
Yeah,
That's funny.
For me, it was the inattentive. I would get distracted, and then I wouldn't complete things. I wasn't interested in it. It wasn't interesting. Give me something artsy. Yeah. Art class was fun. Art class was really fun. I could do that. But you give me math and...
Yeah. I was the opposite. So I was math and English, and then art class, I'm just like, here's another stick figure. I'm done.
Yeah. And yeah, I was completely opposite. You give me something I really got to think on. It's not just my imagination coming out here. Mm-hmm. No, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. I'm not interested.
That's a really good question. I don't know if anybody here can really answer it, but with dissociative identity disorder, would all your alter egos have ADHD?
I don't know what dissociative identity disorder is.
It used to be called multiple personality disorder.
Oh.
And if I'm not mistaken, it had to be a childhood trauma that would bring upon these additional personalities kind of to protect yourself.
Yeah.
And also from what I understand, they're all already in you. You're just fragmenting your consciousness, are you not? So,
yeah,
that's a theory.
I don't think that they're all guaranteed to have ADHD.
Yeah, if you look at it from so if ADHD is indeed a neurobiological difference and your brain is structured differently, then theoretically they would all have ADHD. However, if you're truly completely dissociating and you're accessing a completely different brain state to do that, they might not all have ADHD. So that's my non-answer.
That's a safe answer.
Yeah.
I remember what I was going to say earlier too. If you think about habits and routines, or even focus as like something you practice, or even habits are practicing all the time. Back to what I think it was what Misha had said about, is it the times changing? Is it the world we live in? Or is there more diagnosis? Maybe it was Sandy or Shannon. I don't remember. But
I would say all of the above.
yeah, I mean, if you think about those things as skills that need to be practiced, maybe you're just not practicing recently. You know, maybe you aren't doing those things anymore. Life has changed. COVID happened. There's this, there's that. Life is very different than it was many years ago, right? So
my
maybe-
life is different than it was 2 years ago.
maybe you're not practicing focusing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have
Well,
literal
and-
sticky notes across the front here because this is where I sit and do all of the digital art. So
Okay.
I have sticky notes across the top here that says drink water, go to the bathroom, eat.
Oh, wow.
Visual
That's
aid.
smart.
Because I will forget all three of those things.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times I use the restroom before I leave for work. I get to work for if one of my coworkers doesn't say, "Hey, you want to get lunch?" I'm like, "Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah, food.
that's
What's
important." I have gone all day without eating before, and all day without using the bathroom, and
Wow.
and I won't realize until I'm halfway on the freeway,
And then
have
your
another
insides
20
are
minutes
hurting.
of my drive. Yeah,
Rebecca can relate to something Spank said earlier, listening to YouTube happy morning music without words to help her work. I found it interesting. Somebody brought it up. I think it was Ned on one of my late night shows, exploring, kind of trying to channel Kristen Melinda without the singing and pitch.
To be
It
fair,
was
I haven't attempted that on a live stream.
it was a channel that had Van Halen and some other bands where it would play in one side, then it would pan over to the other, and then pan back. I found that had a very interesting effect, which of course is similar to EMDR, because you can do that with going back and forth with sound, not just
Right.
light.
What's EMDR?
Eye movement
It's amazing.
Yeah, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. Big words. Words is hard. It basically engages both sides of the brain to help you reprocess memories. You can typically have somebody with you who's asking you questions to kind of help bring those memories to light. And ultimately, you can also do a reframe at the end. It destroys your memory, but it turns out every time you open a memory, you're actually in write mode anyway. Memories are very fallible. But yeah, they just step you through while you're doing either watching this ball go back and forth or listening to the sound or two paddles with vibration. It helps the brain dig that memory up and kind of reprocess it, not in your emotional center, but in your logical center. It kind of helps you work back through it. To me, it was phenomenal.
Me too.
It did great for me. I know results may vary, I suppose.
Right.
I get nervous letting other people tinker with my thinker.
They're not.
like
It's
that.
not hypnosis.
Tinker.
It's literally the therapist is asking you questions to kind of guide you. Some therapists don't even want you to verbally answer the questions. They just want you to think about it while you're doing the movement. And yeah, I will tell anybody who asks me, it saved my life. It's the reason why
It
I'm
can
able
be
to have this
yeah.
conversation with you guys 2 years later, because I was done.
Well, I'm grateful then.
It can be a really powerful modality for people in processing trauma and kind of allowing them to not be as reactive to reminders of that trauma anymore. Ben explained it just as well as I ever could have. If I find out new things, I'll let you know. I'm training in it in October. So
Wow. Cool.
Awesome. And there's a new modality that's kind of an offshoot from that. And of course, now I can't remember what its initials are.
ART.
What does that stand for?
Accelerated resolution therapy.
Yeah.
Is that
Ben
it?
knows his
Maybe
therapies.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically where at the end. That was my sole experience with the MDRs. We were doing ART at the end, which is then reframing that memory. And in my case, yeah, now you can't, at least in Arizona, if you have that, you can no longer testify to memories that you've had that done to. But in my case,
That's interesting.
Well,
it was no,
yeah, because you basically shuffled them around.
yeah. But I was more than happy to have that done in my case because it was nothing I could testify to anyway. So,
Right.
let's see here. Does anybody, do you have any interesting cheats you use, Dawn, to get around?
Any
Like right now, I found this seems to help me. Real simple fidget toy where all it is two rollers, and it's
Okay.
really simple. Where it's just something that rolls around in your hand. I
Okay. I
find
can't see it yet.
I find
5-minute delay.
this. It's just two rollers, two ball bearings. You know, these things roll. So all you do is you just roll that in your hand. It's simple enough. And you could do it one
Okay.
handed. It seems like it helps me focus at times. I find with anything more complex than that, and I wind up distracting myself with it.
Yeah.
Do you have anything that you use in that
Not
vein?
really. I liked the spinner
Mm,
fidget toys. That helped, but sometimes you have to focus a little too much on it.
yeah.
It was sort of something that I could take for just a quick mental break.
How about?
But you can't.
Oh, sorry.
You can't get a whole lot of work done with that. And
Yeah. How about you, Spanks? Do you have any simple physical thing that you wind up? I guess you talked about earlier about lake bouncing and stuff.
To deal with the inattentiveness?
Yeah. Is there any?
I mean, I'm a slave to it, to be honest. I can like slap myself mentally over and over, like pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. But it's inevitable that I'm going. It is what it is. My mind's going to wander, and I just have to bring myself back and bring myself back. Music helps a ton. The leg bouncing is, I think, like just energy that needs to get out. Sometimes it's a nervous tick. I will say though, if I can like balance myself or meditate prior to a certain event that I want to focus or be chill for, or like I can set myself up for success with those things that we've talked about, like meditation or, practice, like a routine, doing the same thing every day. I'm going to be really good at it at the end of the week. And I'm going to do it on time. I might even be early, on day 7. I guess those are probably my go-tos. And also, if I'm not giving myself the proper nutrition, it's going to be so much worse. If I'm not getting the proper sleep or exercise, it's going to be so much worse. I can tell when I've forgotten something because how hard it is for me to do regular things.
How about you, Plant Freak? Is there any little physical things that you find yourself? Oh,
that's so cute.
My little crocheted squid octopus thing. He's crocheted like a little sock monkey.
He's adorable.
So I pull on the little tentacles when I have my moments, and whether it's for anxiety purposes, but also if I just need to sit and listen. I'm finding through therapies right now, I'm having a hard time listening to what they want me to do because it's boring. Like, I don't want to do that. Can you just take this from in here? Like the Harry Potter thing when I can't remember his name right now. The head of the school takes the wand and takes the memory. Like I need that. Can you just not just take the memory out of my head?
The Dumbledore
So I find that
and
this
the
comes
pensive.
everywhere with me. So yes, the pensive.
That was one of my favorite scenes. Love
It's
that.
it's amazing. It's amazing. And I just rewatched those movies. How ADHD for me to forget the names already.
That's what I need to do, is rewatch those films.
And then I also find myself, I cricket. So this is what at least somebody has told me it's called. I rub my feet together, and I do it quite frequently. So whether I'm falling asleep, waking up, apparently I do it in my sleep is what I've been told. I will do it just when I start getting to that I'm getting distracted point, my feet will start rubbing.
Well,
I
And then I
actually
notice
have to sit in a yoga meditation pose wherever I am. I do it at work. If I have to have shoes that I can slip on and off, because I can't sit in a chair with my feet on the floor. And I don't know why. It's like that alone is enough to pull me out of whatever it is I'm trying to do.
I've had the hypnosis done once, or not done once. I've gone through many times with hypnosis, but one of the things I found was creation. In your imagination, of course, in the hypnosis, creation of a control center in your brain that you can go back there. I find that helps me meditate because you have that baseline. And I find meditation to help me in a great way. Does anybody have problems keeping track of emotions with their ADHD? Oh, that's right. Plant Freak mentioned it earlier. Yes.
What do you mean by
What
keep track?
Well, it's been raised, and I'm trying to ask myself if I do this. There's been a couple of reports that I saw that said that a lot of people with ADHD, they will tend to not, they're feeling these emotions, but they don't really see them as anger and sadness and something else that happened that day. They just see it all as pressure. Do you
Yes.
have to break? I mean, I don't know where I'm fall on that. I'm trying to explore that more now and being aware of that daily emotional management.
Yeah.
I find journaling seems to help, but that's something I'm pretty new to. Does anybody else find the same with them?
The daily check-ins was something that you had mentioned to me recently, Ben, and I'm just starting that. But the main thing that's helped me is understanding that I was misdiagnosed. And that once I stopped using the bipolar techniques and started using ADHD techniques, that my emotion regulation started getting a lot easier.
Wow.
Because now I was actually recognizing it for what it was versus what I was told it was.
Yeah, and I keep finding journaling mentioned all the time. It's getting to the point. Every single thing I look up mentions journaling in some way. I'm expecting at some point to turn around, Tommy's going to be behind me with a 2x4 ready to slap me upside the head, try journaling. Metaphorically, of course. No,
You're basically storing ideas in an external hard drive when you journal. You only have so much bandwidth, so if something's important, write it down. That's what I always say.
Yeah.
I have found dream processing, especially, to be much easier, and going into lucid dreams be much easier after you journal or after I journal.
I used to be able to lucid dream very easily, and now I can't seem to do it anymore. So maybe the journaling will help with that too.
I wonder if that has to do with our growing up, because I feel like it was a lot easier the younger I was. The older I get, the more difficult. Too. But there's also so much else that happens in adult life, right? So who knows?
I feel like with lucid dreaming for me recently, it's just I don't want to see what I'm lucid dreaming. It's never something that has been positive recently, so I've just tried to avoid.
Okay.
And as soon as I start understanding it, I wake up because I'm like, nope, you're getting out of this.
Yeah,
I would always
go ahead.
find ways to change what was happening in the dream. I'm like, well, that's not cool, so we're going to do this instead. And that's where, I would be able to, that's where I learned to fly.
I like that.
I don't want to be in it. Zoop, I'm on the roof of the gym. So.
Yes, Rebecca, nobody would trust me. Nobody would ever trust me with blocks. So yeah, they're typically not going to give me that because yeah, there will be blood.
That's what I had to do for autism spectrum.
What Rebecca is describing to me sounds like one of the basic like IQ tests, basically, that you get as part of a psychological assessment. Like even if you're specifically ruling out ADHD, it's pretty common to do some kind of IQ measure, some kind of what's called an achievement measure, which basically would look at the things you learned in school and look to see if there's a discrepancy. Basically, like if your IQ is such that if they're disparate in some way, like if your IQ is sufficient, but for whatever reason you can't retain information, then the theory is that, oh, there must be a reason for that, whether it's dyslexia, ADHD, or something else.
What's the test where you identify more increasingly complicated patterns?
You mean like the ink blot or just patterns?
Just patterns. Some of them are ink blots. Some of them are like boxes and shaded differently. All kinds of stuff. I took a test in, I want to say it was like 7th or 8th grade, 7th grade, 6th grade, something like that. Middle school.
So there's like a bunch of different commonly used like IQ tests, and most of them have some kind of pattern recognition like that. The most common one I've seen is just a particular one called the Wechsler Intelligence Scale. There's one for kids and one for adults. And it's the one with the blocks. That's a subtest called block design, where you try to recreate a pattern with the different shading on the blocks. And it's supposed to get at spatial reasoning.
Interesting.
I used to get an A when I wrote in 5 to 10 minutes, and used to get a C or D if I spent over an hour on a paper, Rebecca writes. I found that with physical things with me, if I'm doing I used to compete in firearms, and that was true with me even bows. If I don't know, that may be more physical though. That may not be the same thing. I do know that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with crisis management, that a lot of people with ADHD seem to do better if they're in a crisis. I know, or not crisis, chaos. I know that's true in my case. I keep creating chaos, and then I go through and try to create order, and I wind up throwing a bunch of stuff I like away, and it's like, damn it, why did I do that? Does anybody have any thoughts? I don't know. I kind of hesitate to bring this up. As for whether or not they'd be open to medication, not open to medication.
It did not. No, it actually made things worse. I stopped eating.
Interesting.
I have too many fears that the stimulants that would be suggested for me will show up. I know that a doctor, please understand, I do know that a doctor would write a letter saying, she is on these medications, it is for this condition, whatever, but I'm afraid that in my current process, I might get drug tested, and I have now been sober for 9 months. So to have one of those show up and then think that it's a street value something in my body, no.
The consequences are not worth it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'd rather have this guy, and I'll be happy.
I do know that a lot of people with ADHD tend to self-medicate. Tobacco, marijuana, that whole thing, and I guess that's a whole different problem. I found in my case I was doing nicotine lozenges. I gave them up, thinking, oh, this will make things so much easier. Wrong. It actually, I did unfortunately find that, at least in my case, that nicotine seemed to help. So I'm trying to.
It is a stimulant. So.
Yeah, I tried to compensate with caffeine and that compound which I can't pronounce.
Theanine.
Yeah,
something like that. I don't know if that's the one or not. But.
Yeah, Kristen Melinda could probably do it because she can pronounce 3-syllable words.
Well, I don't know which one you're taking, so I'd have to read it to be able to pronounce it.
She goes showing off that fancy ability to read and things like that.
I will say there's not like a solution that's just going to fix you. Like it's not like there's a missing puzzle piece, and if we find the right medication or self-medication or the right habits, it's just gonna boop, you're better now. There's always Yeah, there's no magic pill. There's no blue pill, no red pill. It's just compromise. You're going to give this for this, or you're going to stay the way you are and not have this. And that's an overgeneralization, but all the medications are going to have side effects.
Sure.
Not taking medications are going to have its downsides. No matter what, you're going to have to like learn how to move through the world in a different way than is natural.
Yeah, and I remember I asked my doctor when I was first told about this. I'm like, okay, it makes sense. But okay, doc, how do we kill it? She's like, started laughing at me almost. Really? This is lifestyle stuff. Come on, you're killing me, doc. You're killing me.
Yeah, I have to do work.
God, I don't want any more lifestyle stuff. I want easy.
I think different things work better for different people. Obviously, for myself, I personally feel very cautious about prescribing stimulant medications to young children. I wouldn't want to do that right out of the gate with nothing else. That would, for me, for my child, that would be a later trial, and that's not a value judgment. Some people do need that, and that is what allows them to live their best life. For me, I would be cautious. That wouldn't be my first line that I'd want to do. And that's because of things like Dawn mentioned, like appetite suppressant. Children's brains are still developing. Actually, your brain's not done developing till you're 25, and for some people a little later. And introducing stuff that young is bound to have an effect. So that's just for me personally, not medical advice.
Sure. Yeah. This is closing thoughts. Anybody have anything they want to say that I didn't ask? Anybody have anything they want to add?
Not that I can think of.
Mighty Kristen.
Thank you for having me. I feel so lucky to be on screen with such cool people. This is awesome.
You're the cool people. What are you talking about?
I really
you can
appreciated
pronounce the 3-syllable words.
I really appreciated you, Kristen, and you, Dawn, for your expertise and your professional knowledge on this subject. That's something I don't often get, and that's not something I'm often open to either. I'm sure you guys can tell, but I really appreciate that from both of y'all. And Plant Freak, you are shining today. Whatever's going on in your life, keep doing it, dude.
Yes.
I was going to tell you later, but I'm about to run away.
I would like to thank you all for joining me on this exercise in self-indulgence, or whatever you might call it. You all are great people. I look up to you all, and to everybody in the chat, thank you so much for joining us. I do hope everybody has a most awesome day, and take care.
You're the man, Ben. Thanks again, man.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ben.